Hello, this is Amanda from Rise and Procrastinate doing a video for Fairy Stamper. Today we will be making a ink blended and stenciled background and using that beautiful die cut from Creative Expressions called Luna Fairy Edger. So I'm just holding my stencil here and trying to figure out exactly where I want to cut the Luna Fairy Edger die. And I wanted to cut it slightly at an angle to kind of go with the way that that stencil, the stars in the middle kind of go at a curved angle there. I am cutting this die out of a Neenah 110 pound Neenah Classic Crest 110 pound cardstock, and I did cut it 2 more times off screen. That way you didn't have to watch me do all that. There are a lot of little intricate pieces you gotta pop out here, and we're not gonna show all that, but I did want to show you kind of what it looks like, so I'm just gonna pop out a few of them here. Alright, so now I've got a piece of Neenah Classic Crest 80 pound cardstock, and I'm just going to ink blend quickly some Distress ink on it. I've got Salty Ocean, and we're just using some blender brushes and just quickly applying some ink. I'm not really too terribly worried about how smooth it is. I'm just going to quickly apply some ink down. And we're going to move on to Blueprint Sketch here in a second. We're just going to overlap the inks here in the middle. And this is the Blueprint Sketch. I'm having a weird little problem with these white bristled brushes. I have some that are brown and some that are white, and for whatever reason my white ones feel kind of dry and scratchy on the paper, and they're not really blending the greatest. That's why I keep like flipping it over and looking at it. So if you're wondering why I'm doing that, that's why I'm doing that. It almost feels like there's something on it, or they don't have enough ink on it or something, even though my pads are quite juicy. But I don't know what the deal is with these ones, so I might be switching to my brown ones again. So now we're moving on to Chipped Sapphire. So I'm just going to apply the ink there. I did flip over my paper so that it's more ergonomic for me to ink blend here. And we're just going to overlap the inks again. Now I'm going to go back to that Blueprint Sketch and kind of work at the overlapped part so we get a nice smoother blend. Again, I'm not really too terribly concerned about it being completely smooth, but I do want the areas where the two colors blend to look somewhat nice. All right. Oh, and I did want to fix that chipped sapphire up at the top there. So then we're going to move on here in a second. I'm going to spritz some water on this, and that's why I didn't really care if the ink blending was completely smooth, because this will kind of fix that. So I did do a couple full spritzes there, and then I kind of half pumped my sprayer to get those bigger drops. Now we're just going to heat set that because I am impatient. And now I'm going to use a DIY shimmer spray. It's just a mix of Perfect Pearls in the color Perfect Pearl and some water. Once I dried that, I'm going to stick the Fairy Hugs Galaxy stencil over my panel. I do have some pixie spray on the back of it. It's from a previous use, so I am going to tape it down here too, just to be sure that my stencil doesn't move. All right, so now we're going to move on to some Distress Oxides. And the reason why I'm using Oxide is because Oxides are a blend of pigment and dye inks. They are a hybrid ink, and they are opaque versus dye inks being translucent. So I can blend over the inks that I already have on the paper, and it won't really show the blue through as much as it would as if I used a dye ink, which is, like I said, translucent. So I'm going to blend the Squeezed Lemonade over the top here, and I'm trying to mainly stay on that little swirly part in the middle there. I was going to do a blend of the Twisted Citron and the Squeezed Lemonade, but as you see, I kind of cut that part out here because in the end I decided that there really wasn't big contrast between the Twisted Citron and the Squeezed Lemonade. So I ended up just going over the whole panel with the Twisted Citron because I found that it was more of an opaque color than the Squeezed Lemonade. So that's why I just ended up cutting a lot of that out, because we're just going to go over it anyway. But I did want to show that that's what I ended up doing, and that you could see the difference between the two colors. As you can see here, the Twisted Citron is a bit more opaque, at least over the ink blending that I've done here. So once I get this little swirl part covered up, we're going to move on to some oh, evergreen bough here. I wanted to kind of have a little bit of a contrast between the bottom and the top. So I'm going to put a little tiny bit of evergreen bough at the bottom and then kind of ink blend that in towards the top. And then we're going to move on to some wild honey. And I wanted the sides to be a bit different than that little swirly part there in the middle. So that is why I chose wild honey. So we're just going to finish up the ink blending on those sides with that. And I know that this seems like an odd coloring for stars, but once I pull off the stencil, you will see that they do somewhat appear to be more yellow than orange. And the twisted citron appears more yellow than green. So it does work out in the end, I promise. So we're just going to cover that up and make sure that my colors are applied quite heavily so it is nice and opaque. All right, here's the ink blended panel all nice and dry. I'm going to mount it on a piece of black cardstock that is 1/8 inch bigger than my ink blended panel here. Just using some Nuvo Deluxe adhesive for that. That is my glue of choice. We're just going to line it up nicely here. And then once I get this on there, we're going to put that fairy edger die. Let's see, Luna fairy edger die, I believe. Now I've already forgotten the name. Anyway, we're going to put that on top. I do put my stamp platform on it for a few minutes to let it dry, nice and flat. And then I'm just making sure that everything's going to line up here. I wasn't sure if I wanted the edger die to line up with my card base or if I wanted it to line up with my card panel, if that makes sense. If I wanted to cut it down and have it line up with that. So I was still deciding. Right at the last minute before I glued it down, I decided that I actually wanted it to line up with the ink blended panel instead of that black panel, which was kind of it wasn't a mistake. It looks good in the end, but it was difficult to cut down since I had already glued my ink blended panel down. I would recommend that you attach it and cut it down before you glue it. So I'm using my T-square ruler here to make a mark, so I know exactly where I need to cut, and then I'm just kind of pulling it up from the whole panel so I can get my scissors underneath there and cut it. It was a little difficult, but I got it in the end. So now we're just going to glue this all down to the card base. And then I believe I left it in. My little gluing trick. We'll see here. Maybe I already talked through it. Let's see. I do believe that I go back in and glue a couple of those delicate pieces down. Yes, right here. So I do use a little scrap of cardstock with a little dab of glue and go in and glue some of those little delicate pieces down that I missed or didn't get enough glue on. I do find that is extremely helpful. It's hard to get your little glue bottle nozzle underneath those pieces. So then I had a little scrap from when I cut down my background, and I like to use these. If you've watched my videos on my channel before, you've seen me do this. I like to glue those in on the inside. That way they don't end up in the trash or end up in a drawer of all these little scraps that I never use. This way I use it right away. So this one wasn't quite as long as my my card base because I cut it wrong. If you cut the bottom or the top off first and then cut the sides off, it's not going to be as long as your card base. So that's what I did. So I ended up cutting a little tiny piece of scrap black cardstock to make it as long as my card base. And then we're just gluing it inside the card. So it kind of brings the outside to the inside and gives you a little pop of color there. So next we're going to use some Nuvo Aqua Shimmer pen in glitter gloss, and I'm just covering the moon and the fairy. Make her all sparkly. It just brings her out from the rest of the edger die and brings the moon out too. And that pretty much finishes up my card for today. I hope that you enjoyed it. The supplies will be listed in the description box below with links to the Fairy Stamper store. There's also a link to the Fairy Stamper Hugs Facebook group where we have challenges and you can share your projects. My links to my Facebook page and YouTube channel and all that are in the description box below as well. And I hope that you subscribe to our channel and my channel as well. And as always, have a great day.